Last week, I was scrolling through Instagram when I came across a post from Deepak Chopra, and it read, quote, "A new world is being born. We need only remember our source," end quote. The post stopped me in my tracks for a couple of reasons. First, I think one of the million-dollar questions we've all been contemplating living with this new reality of this COVID outbreak is, what is the world going to look like post-COVID? Second, it got me thinking, what the heck did Deepak mean when he said, we need only remember our source? I posted it on my own feed on Instagram and asked for feedback from my community. Juliana wrote, quote, "For me, source is God. But you see, God has never been concerned for a moment what name we've given him. It's a feeling and knowing, and we all have that connection within us." Blue Frog wrote, "For me, source is the all-knowing within, our birthplace, the connection we have to purpose and humanity." But it was John Trapp's comment that really got me. He said simply, "Time for a chat with Mandy Trapp, Carrie." You know what? I actually laughed out loud when I read John's quote because I have known Mandy for years, deep respect and admiration for her, and I've wanted to do a podcast for a long time with her. So I took this as the universe connecting us, bringing us back together for many reasons, I am sure. So many of you know Mandy. She has spent nearly 20 years studying and teaching mindfulness and meditation. As a student of Dr. Deepak Chopra, Mandy was learning how to blend ancient wisdom with modern science and then integrate the teachings back into her own life. She is a busy mom of 3, but managed to open Canada's first mainstream meditation center in 2016. Lifestyle meditation began with teacher training programs written and delivered by Mandy. And now it has grown to include, this gives me goosebumps when I get to read this, a team of facilitators and international training venues while certifying over 3,000 meditation teachers to date. Mandy's teaching style is honest, down to earth, and full of wisdom. She is a fierce advocate for those struggling to be seen, to be heard, and to belong. Her goal is to empower others by bringing them back to themselves and support them to seek the meaning in their suffering while using their struggles as a means for connection rather than disconnection. Oh boy, this is going to be such an insightful conversation for many reasons, and especially because of the world we are now living in today. It's finally happening. Hello to the one and only, the absolutely stunning inside and out, Mandy Trapp. Welcome to the Inner Circle.
Yay! I'm
Oh.
so excited to be here. And honestly, Carrie, it didn't happen before. People don't know this, but you were trying to call my old phone number for how long? And it didn't happen because this is what hopefully we get to talk about today, is that I believe that there's always a greater rhythm and reason for as things are unfolding, and it was supposed to happen now.
I guess, and I trust that 1,000,000%. And that's why the universe brought us together at such an interesting time in our lives. I want to tackle Deepak's quote right away because you worked and trained alongside him. You know him well.
Yeah, very well. Yeah,
so what did that mean to you? I would love for you to speak to that right off the top before we get into your how and why, but what did he mean with that quote when he said a new world is being born? We need only remember our source.
It actually, like, I want to cry right now when you say that. And of course I read that on his Instagram as well. And as I was scrolling, and I think sometimes we get so used to, like when you tell somebody you love them, and it's not that the feeling isn't there, but it doesn't really hit you the same way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I saw, okay, yeah, Deepak says this, of course, of course, of course. And then to hear that come out of your mouth, maybe it's just the day today and for us having this important conversation, but a new world is being born. I think of all of us like infants and all of us like babies, is that when we reemerge back into the world, is that we're going to see it through new eyes. And I'll never forget like a quote that I heard Ellen say, like, most amazing person ever, a few years ago. And she said, everybody always treats, they always say, treat your life like this is your last day on the planet. And she said, I don't believe in that. I believe that you should treat every day like it's your first day on the planet. Mm-hmm. And with the wonderment and the awe and the curiosity of a child. And I feel like when we're talking about this process of birthing, we're birthing a new world, but we're the infants that are stepping back into it. And we have this opportunity to look at everything through new eyes and through a new filter. And we all, at one point in time, we had that innocence, right? Before that,
yes,
the world told us, this is right, this is wrong, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, and started to separate and to segregate us according to color and race and gender and religion and all of these things. Before that, kids didn't care who they played with on the playground. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they were so close to source, whatever word you want to use for source. They were so close to a place of absolute pure connection that they didn't know any differently. And I feel like it's been my experience, at least over the last 20 years, really diving into these practices, is that we come from that and then eventually we return to that.
Right.
But it's sort of this wandering that happens in between the birth and the death. And I think even if you look at why do people who are closer to the end of their life connect so well with babies and with toddlers, because for them, I call it the veil, this illusion that shuts us off. This veil is so thin that it's easy for them to be in that space. And I think so many of us have wanted that for so long. We know what doesn't feel right. We know what doesn't feel aligned. We know what feels wrong or yucky or sticky, but we don't know the potentiality that we have. And I think that so many of us have been fed that, well, then you have to believe in God or you have to go to church to be able to feel source or connection. And so we've just turned away from that entirely, and we've shut ourselves off from a spiritual connection, when you and I both know you can have that when you're running in the river valley. Yeah. You can have that when you're skiing on top of a mountain and you just look in and you allow the wonderment there. And I think for me, I actually really love that we're all being forced to go into our homes right now. It's the metaphor for meditation, is get all of the distractions off your plate. And the last thing that I'll say about that is that one of my girlfriends actually sent me a message this morning, and she was going super squirrely. And she lives by herself. And she's like, I've talked to nobody for the last month. I've seen nobody for the last month. Yeah. And you must be so crazy with your kids and everybody and that. And I said, I've done a lot of silent retreats in my life, 5 days, 7 days. And you go through that process when you're not talking to anybody. You start in the beginning thinking you have so much to say and you just want to get out there and share it. But then usually by day 4, day 5, you realize it actually doesn't matter anymore. Right? And look at everybody who was freaking out on social media for the first 2 or 3 weeks, and they had something to say about everything. And now I notice that the comments are going down on things and people are just kind of scrolling through. And I think a lot of it is the inner processing. So coming back to remembering, where do we all connect? Where do we meet? And then hopefully on the other side, when we reemerge into the world, can I not only see that, but can I feel that?
I want you to expand on something you said, is that you're really happy that this is happening. Give us the why behind that.
Well, some people are not going to like that I have to say this. And let me just provide a bit of a caveat to that. But my life is also, in some ways, I'm very privileged that my husband has a great job and we haven't been financially strapped that way. But there's massive changes for me with my business, and I don't know what that's going to look like tomorrow. So this has definitely come with a lot of struggles. And my oldest daughter, who's 17, struggles with severe anxiety and depression. And this has been rocky for her. So I just have to start by saying this hasn't been easy. So this is definitely coming from a space of being able to connect with others who are really suffering in this time. But what I'm seeing happening right now is what we've been asking for a long time. And maybe I'm super aware of this because that's been my job, so to speak, for 20 years, is having people come to me saying, I hate my life. I don't want my job. I can't stand being in a corporate environment. I struggle with my kids' teachers and principals because I hate the way that they're jamming school down kids' throats, and they're not allowing them to really show up as who they are, and they want to over-medicate them. And I have been hearing day in and day out these prayers and these pleas of people. And now we're starting to see that the economy is shutting down, that the schools have shut down, that religious institutions. You can't go to a church anymore. Everything that we were bitching and complaining that's broken, it's like, okay, well, let's fix it. But you can't fix it while you're in it, right? Like me with my own business, and probably you with yours, is as long as you're always working in it, you can't really be working on it and see it from a detached perspective. So what I say, I'm glad that this is happening, is that I think every one of us needs that space, and we need that break to step back and to have more of that, I'd say, that mindful kind of altitude to be able to see the bigger picture. And then the trick from there, though, is not going to be waiting for the government to drop their hand and say, okay, go rush back into your life. The trick is that while we're up here or while we're outside of it, is to understand that we get to consciously create the world that we're going to step back into. Like, what do I want that to look like? Or am I going to fall back into this feeling like I don't have a say and I feel completely disempowered in, I don't know, in what that's going to look like?
So before I move forward, I want to move backward on something. And I love that you explained that in terms, and prefacing it, that there are a lot of people that have lost their jobs, and there's so much uncertainty right now. And I do hold space for those. And like you said, your business, my business, lost all of the speaking engagements. They're all gone. So we're all having to pivot. Does any of this surprise you that it's happening? Because you said we asked for it. So I want you to dig into that a little bit more, because sometimes, I was out for a walk with my husband last night, and I was so looking forward to this conversation and your perspective. And I said, sometimes our world just seems like such a bloated mess. We were abusing the earth and the pollution and all of these things, and wealth and poverty, and it just was coming at us every possible direction. So I want to dig into that, whether or not you said like we were asking for it. What do you mean by that, Mandy?
My belief is that we are always asking to have a specific experience. We don't just always get to choose how that's going to show up. Right. And so I can even think about in my marriage, and to be like completely vulnerable and candid, there was 5 years ago where my husband had just sold his business that he started on our wedding day. It was like their first day in production. And so that was chaotic, and having 3 kids and on and on. And so he had just sold his business, and he was a bit lost. And, when one person changes in a relationship, naturally it changes both. It changes both of you. It changes the dynamic of how you relate to each other. And we were like arguing with each other. And I mean, trust, there was still a lot of love there, but we were really trying to find our way back together, but in a new way. And I know that both of us were, I mean, if you want to use the word praying or just pleading to God, saying like, we really want more intimacy. We want to find a deeper connection. We want to find deeper love. But the way that I was fairy tailing that out in my head would be that he would just show up on a horse in front of the door and say, I was wrong and I should have treated you this way. But the way that it did show up was probably one of the most uncomfortable moments for both of us in our entire life. And through that, I mean, we had the gift of somebody from the outside looking in and saying, this is your opportunity, right? Like, I'm not saying that you've asked for this breakdown to happen, but you have been asking for things to change. You've been asking for deeper connection. Like, when are you going to wake up and see that this here could be that? And so we both looked at each other, and luckily, we're conscious enough and aware enough and had enough love and respect for ourselves and for each other to say, yeah, like we could really put something back together here. And she'd used the analogy of how the Japanese never throw out their china when they break the chinas. They actually mend it together with gold, because gold is the strongest binder or connector on the planet. And I think that for ourselves right now too, is it's hard to say. And I'm not a believer in this whole idea that everything happens for a reason, because I think if we always use the word reason, and I learned this from an incredible man by the name of Rob Nash, who tours around, and former musician who's just changing everybody's life now. But he had said he got into this wicked car crash and he was almost pronounced dead on the scene. And it ended up that they called his family in and basically said, we're going to have to read him like his last rites. He's not going to make it through the night. Long story short, he makes it through the night, but it's a long road of recovery. And then he goes on to tour all of these schools, and he's helping kids with life and message, and they're turning in suicide notes to him. And a couple of years later, he said he had a woman who came up to him and was just really commenting on all of this positive change that he had been able to inflict in his life. And she said, you know, like, everything happens for a reason then, doesn't it? And he said, he looked at her and he was just, are you people allowed to swear on your thing?
Yeah, this is real life, man.
And he's this big rocker, and he goes, I just looked at her and I said, fuck you. I don't believe for a second that, no, this didn't happen for a better reason. I would never put my family through this again. Like, could you imagine being parents that get a call that your child is about to die? And I mean, he was a grown man at the time. He goes, I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. I'm not going to sit here and contemplate the rest of my life. Like, it happened because I made this choice, or it happened because I got in the car. He said, if I start fresh from today and I look at what have I been able to make out of this? He goes, now my mantra is that everything happens for an opportunity.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so he said, I knew on a bigger level or a bigger picture that I wasn't living a life on purpose. I knew that, and he was like touring with Our Lady Peace. Like, he had a big record contract and all these things too. But he said, I was praying every day to be able to have a greater impact. And I wouldn't say that the car accident was what I called in. Right. And so that's kind of the piece that I wanted to share, is that we can't look at all of this, and for people that are being devastated by it and losing people who are dying, I would never for a moment look at them in the eyes and say, oh, well, thank you for allowing, you know, your family member to be a sacrifice, because this is happening for a reason. So we can pick up. Well, we're not asking for that, but what we have been asking for is deeper connection, is people coming back to meaning and purpose. It's for the healing of the planet, and it's all of the systems and the organizations. Did we ask for this? No, but it is what it is. And there's an opportunity here for every single one of us to take, should we choose to see this as an opportunity.
Okay.
And
so
that's it, right?
let's dig into that opportunity. We talked about the why. How do we implement this in our life? And what's the opportunity here for all of us?
I think every single one of us needs to do our own work with that first, before we start to change the systems to say, oh, yay, the economy broke down. It's broken, so let's fix it. Right. And the school system is broken, so let's fix it. I think that, and I'm just hearing like kind of Einstein's little blabber in my ear about, you know, if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, like, that's the definition of insanity.
Insanity, yeah.
There's also a bigger picture. I mean, if you read more into what Einstein really meant by that, is that he was really just talking about trying to find solutions from the same level of consciousness or awareness that we were in when we created the problem.
Right.
So if we don't actually raise our consciousness or our awareness and see things from a higher perspective, then we're still down in the valley trying to create solutions with what we've already done. Right? Like, if you think about a house, and if it burnt down, or if it crumbled, I'll just say if it crumbled to the ground in an earthquake, the pieces aren't necessarily damaged, but you only have those pieces. It's very finite. And if the only way that you know to rebuild that structure is from the previous design that you had, well, if that structure was strong enough in the first place, it probably wouldn't have succumbed to the earthquake.
Right.
So yes, we have those pieces, but I think that when we raise our level of consciousness and we get a little bit higher up, we can see that, no, if I also partner with my neighbor, or if I go and meet the guy down the block, is that everybody has all of this different material that's new, that now with a greater awareness, we can build something that's even stronger, right? To be able to weather the next storm. But that's kind of how we continue to evolve as a society. Otherwise, we just keep getting stuck in the same.
It's so powerful to frame it that way and to look at it from that perspective, because I think a lot of people right now, it's safe to say, are searching, and they're doing their own self-reflection and reevaluation. And your message to people right now, Mandy, is that there's so many that are like, do this, do that, accomplish this, learn that. How do you see this time, what we should be doing individually?
I think it's a time for meditation, yes, but self-reflection. And what I mean by the self-reflection is to almost like you're doing inventory and you get to look at what is everything that is really working for me in my life. And by working, I mean not getting into the pros and cons list of what the mind wants to create around that, but really getting into your heart. And as hokey as it sounds, is what actually feels right, what feels aligned for me. And then what are the pieces that aren't? And to be really honest with that, because I think there's a lot of people that come to the spiritual path that do a really good job at the vision boarding and
Yes.
they want everything to look like this. Everybody does it, but they're not willing to let anything else go to create space for that. And there's many reasons for that, right? Sometimes we just cling to what we know because it feels safe, even if it doesn't feel evolutionary, it feels safe. And then other times it's because we have to have really tough conversations with other people and we don't like conflict or we don't want to rock the boat. But we always have to, if we're going to be growing and evolving, we have to start to shed and to get rid of the parts of us that don't fit anymore. And to be comfortable with that leap. There's always going to be a little leap.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the leap of faith. Is that I jumped from where I was to where I am. And I mean, I know that you've done that personally for you in your life, as I've done that. And people thought that I was crazy. And before I took the leap, I had to be okay for everybody to think that I was crazy. And I had to be okay to fall, because only when I was, then it didn't matter. It didn't matter if I actually caught that next branch or if I didn't. I was still good in myself because I knew that I was doing what I needed to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's go back and talk about your leap. Like, how did you come into meditation, into this line of work, and why?
That's a really good question.
Does it seem like a lifetime ago?
It feels like 10 life. I feel like I've leaped so many times. But in a really interesting way, because my daughter is 17 now, and I'm seeing how Brooklyn shows up, and it's like me at 17. And so even though it feels like I've leaped, it's not been linear. It's actually been circular.
Wow.
I feel like I'm coming back to who I was as this. I had tons of friends, but I was the hippie. I was like the weird kid in the cool crowd, which I'm kind of like that right now again too. So that I think I've just always been highly, highly observant and sensitive. And it's been a huge part of me just being able to find a sense of safety and grounding in myself since I was a little kid. And so my parents never taught me any of this kind of stuff. They were just really open and loving and kind people. We didn't really go to church unless it was like Christmas or Easter, but I spent a lot of time just stopping in the Catholic church on my way home from school because I just loved being in silence when nobody was there, like since first grade. So it was a little odd that that was my place to be. And then I started as a personal trainer. And I remember my first year at Body by Bennett, and I was like 20. And Simon, you and I both know Simon.
Yes.
Simon hands me a book and he's like, one of my clients just gave me this stupid book on yoga, but I think you'll appreciate it, because I was big into yoga. And I said, are you re-gifting me a book on yoga? And he's like, I guess I am. I don't want it. And I had just finished also. So while I was finishing up my schooling at NAIT, I had just finished my first yoga training as well. And I remember leafing through that book, and there was one page in there with this beautiful Indian woman with this sari, and maybe she was like in her 80s or something. And just, I felt like her eyes were looking at me. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture or a painting or anything like that. And I'm like, you're talking to me about something. And there was a small little excerpt on that page that talked about meditation and self-realization. And my yoga training I had just done talked nothing about meditation. It was like, close your eyes in Shavasana at the end and let everything integrate. And I was like, okay. But for me, it was a coming home. I'm 20 going, I know this, I do this, like this feels so familiar to me. And so behind closed doors for the next few years, like this is what I was pursuing. And I wouldn't tell anybody about it because it seemed weird. And I would just do the yoga thing, and I was training. And then, I mean, I won't tell the whole story because it would take forever, but I magically landed with Deepak just around the time that I was having my daughter. And I spent the next 7 years kind of going back and forth between where he was down in just outside of San Diego in Carlsbad and back to Edmonton. And it felt so much like I was stitching a quilt. Like every time I would go probably every 2 months, And I would go down for a week or 2 weeks, and I would take all my courses and learning and tests. And then I'd bring all of that back, and I'd bring it back into Body by Bennett. I'd bring it to the gym. I'd bring it to my family. So this happened for 7 years. So while having babies, while doing all of that stuff. And it was great. Simon and I are such good friends, and he'd say, you know, Mandy, you can have the back room, like do your meditation thing, do whatever you want to do. And so one by one, like people would always walk in, and especially all the hockey guys, and they'd start to make jokes like, what are these guys doing? And I mean, talk about being back to the source and where do we connect, is it's like, I don't see these guys as guys that make millions of dollars every year that deserve to have their job, you know, if they did a good job or a bad job, like on the front page of the paper the next day. That I saw human beings. I saw these little souls that were in this body just trying to be happy and find fulfillment in life the same way that I was. The only difference was that I could talk a little more openly about that, but they couldn't. Right. And then about 8 years ago, I think I was telling you, I was at a big event with Deepak Chopra, and I was teaching and giving mantras and doing my thing there, and then just kind of helping out and participating on the side. And 8 years ago, he took the stage with this incredible woman by the name of Jean Houston. And it was like I told you, that he was like the pilot of a plane calling fire and saying, you know, this ship is going down if we don't really commit. And I'm not just saying like, yay, I'm going to meditate every day, or I'm going to bring more peace into my world, but like, what are you going to do about it? And there were microphones at the event, and people would stand up, and it didn't feel like a big hokey thing, but like, let's start the conversation here. And I knew that the person that I was that walked in, who lived what I felt professionally a very double life. I was Mandy out on the floor who was training everybody, and then I'd sneak and hide and go into the room to really do the deep work. And I'm like, why isn't this out in the main room?
Yeah.
Right? Because all that it's doing is it's increasing the stigma that we have behind mental health and spiritual health. And I walked out just saying, I can't do that anymore.
Oh, wow.
And that was it. I went and talked to Simon the next week, and I said, I love you, and I'm leaving personal training.
Wow.
and I'm also leaving teaching yoga, because even yoga became very mainstream. And people are used to that. And if I'm just like popping in, I think of it like how I used to put, you know, spinach into my kids' brownies all the time, just so that they get it.
Yes.
Is it's still kind of this sneaky, manipulative way to get the message, but is that really what's going to wake people up?
Yeah.
Or do we just stop and say, put this piece of spinach in your mouth right now because this is good for you?
Yeah.
And that's when I went to meditation, and that's it.
I think like I know the answer to this, at least I think I do. But when you made that decision, was it easy?
No. Yes and no. Yes
Okay.
and no. For me personally, it was super easy, because I felt like I had been, it was exhausting running out of the room and putting one mask on and then going in the other room and taking the mask off. So it was easy from the perspective that I'm like, oh, thank God I don't have to do that anymore. And not that I'm still not the Mandy who loves to dance and play and throw kettlebells around. That is still very much me. But I was really shutting off a part of who I was while I was doing that.
Yes.
And so the easiness and the amount of energy that I received from doing that part was easy. The other part that wasn't easy was the ego part. It was the human part that needs to be seen and heard and appreciated and validated. And kind of how I'd shared with you with my husband earlier is that when one person changes, is that everybody else tries to figure out, well, how do I relate to them now? And people did not know how to relate to me. And so to try to re-educate or re-inform them, I lost a lot of friends. I think they probably still loved me, but they stopped calling. They didn't really know, well, if I can't do this, I'm like, hey, I'm still the same person, but I did. But I also gained a lot of new friends and new connections that, to be honest, felt so much more true and just easy connections where I didn't have to show up as anybody that wasn't me.
Powerful, to be able to have that all in your heart and to still take the leap. So what happened from there?
So it was good timing. So we decided that at that point in time, synchronistically, so here's how the web of life, everything happens, right? We were looking for a new home. And actually the home that we had looked at just before I went to that Chopra event and fell in love with had a studio in it. So It had like a yoga studio in it / meditation studio. And then when we were away in Whistler for this event, hoping that they accepted our offer, we didn't know what was going on. I remember my husband, John, saying, okay, well, like you are the master manifester and attractor. Of course you would be saying, I'm leaving this for this, and you would already have a space to do that, right?
Right, yeah.
And I think sometimes that's also just evidence that you're on the right track and you're on the right path as these things start to show up and you see it as the opportunity. And it was a leap too. I mean, we were going from something that was, whatever, one price point to double the price point, and you're moving neighborhoods and you don't know a lot of these things, but that's where I began. And I decided, I thought, okay, so I've been teaching meditation one-on-one in the back room forever.
Yeah.
What happens if I put myself out there now, like in the big room, and I say, hey, as many people as want to come? Well, I know that people need meditation, but they might not know that they need it. What if nobody comes?
Yeah.
And I had to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. And Carrie, I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a go for 6 months and I'll just see, maybe I'm crazy. So I decided to do one little workshop, just like an introduction to meditation, 2 hours, 1 a month for 6 months. And I did some out of my house, but I did some out of other places, like Dave and Jenny in Sherwood Park at Moksha were great. They're like, you can do this here. Because, in 6 months, over 600 people came.
Oh, wow.
And this was before Facebook advertising was a thing. Like I would just put it out on Facebook and say, hey friends, like if you want to come and learn, come and learn. It blew my mind. And after every single one of those workshops, I probably had at least 1 or 2 handfuls of people coming up saying like, oh my gosh, can you come to my school? Can you come to my business? Can you come to my house? Can you come and I'm like, no, I can't. That is like, I'm one person and I can't be in all of those places. So within probably a couple more months after that, I developed that first teacher training. That's the level 1 that there's been over 3,000 people that have come through it. Everything from stay-at-home moms to, oh my gosh, everything. I keep thinking of this woman who went through last year, she's a physician in Kuwait. And she had come to do some work at U of A for a year. She took the training, and the day after she left the training, she was flying back to Kuwait. And she goes, I want you to know that I'm going to be teaching this meditation to all of the patients and the physicians in the hospital. And I cry every time I think about that because the impact is so far reaching. I'll never know. But I'll just keep going, because even if somebody comes and they say, well, I don't want to be a teacher. No, it's not about, I want to sit on a stage and teach meditation. It's about the fact that we're always teaching people, whether you're aware of it or not, by how you're showing up.
That's right.
Right? That's it.
So powerful. And the gift that you are giving so many people around you by training them and then sharing that with them. But to go from that, a studio in your home, and I remember this time when you actually opened lifestyle meditation, because there was nothing like it in Canada. Like, where did we ever find a place that was all based on meditation? Where like, it's one of those immeasurables, right? And so I remember you said, we're opening. I was like, whoa, this is huge, but spoke to what you're doing. So tell me about that next leap, what it was like, and the response that came from it.
I will. And it's been funny timing that we're doing this right now. It's been a bit of a wild ride. Actually, my husband and I were talking about it this morning. We decided to do it while we were living in Bali for a year. So that was 5 years ago. And I had started the trainings 2 years before that. So I had 5 other facilitators I trained. So the teacher trainings kept going on without me in Canada. I just managed them from Bali.
Right.
And right around the time that we left was really when we changed governments federally and provincially. And the economy went like this.
Boom.
And so we saw a lot of our friends who are part of the Entrepreneurs Organization with John, and a lot of people who were in oil and gas, or everything in Alberta and in Canada is basically impacted by that. But are all of our best friends like being severely impacted and having to close businesses and filing for bankruptcy, or having to move or to pivot and to lay people off? And we're watching all of this from a distance, having, I think, John, in some ways, because he had just sold his business 6 months before this, kind of like that survivor's guilt in a way, people saying, you're so lucky you got it when you did. And nobody knew that was coming. Nobody knew. We didn't know. Again, I think that there was a bit of a bigger plan. Yeah. There was other opportunities for us too, but we always knew that when we left, we were going to be coming home. Although some days I'm like, why did I ever leave Bali? But
Bali is a pretty fabulous place. I can relate. We honeymooned there.
We always knew that we would come home. And I also think it's that higher perspective. It's back to the metaphor of what am I reemerging back into, and how do I want to do that as purposefully as possible? And John and I thought long and hard about it. And how can we serve our community? How can we help people who don't know where to go due to stress and anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder? And how do we bring people together in community? And that's when we kind of had this idea for the studio, and we're like, yeah, but does it work? No. It's one thing to say, okay, let's do it, but does it work? And at that time, there were 2 that had just popped up in LA. They were brand new. And granted, it's LA, right? Yeah. And then we committed to it. We secured the space while we were away. And then we saw one pop up in New York. And we're like, LA, New York, Edmonton. Okay, sounds good.
Logical path.
The logical path. Edmonton's always on the heels of that.
Of course.
It's been like, to be totally honest, it's been like this. And what I mean it's been like that is that it's been like this in terms of people that have come and utilized all of the services. There's way more need than there are resources available for people. I'll just say that. But actually operating a business in this economy, and now with COVID, there's so many different logistics at play that's really tough. That's really tough. But every single day I wake up and I'm like, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's because of this. It's because of, I really firmly believe that the shit's always going to hit the fan, and there are always going to be wheels falling off the bus. Okay. So it's how prepared are we for that? Life is about change, and that's why I keep doing what I'm doing. And right now, we've been closed down for over a month and a half, and we've been able to still service some of our community over this virtually, like through Zoom. We've had an online platform for a couple of years. But at the end of the day, I believe in personal connection and in human connection. And so what that's going to look like on the other side of it, I actually don't know, Carrie. I wish I could say, I've clients messaging me every day, please tell me you guys are going to reopen. I need it so bad right now. Yeah. And I say I keep saying something is going to reopen.
We have faith. We have faith that it has to.
Whether it's that specific space or I have to find a different one, I'm not sure. I have a huge overhead, and I'm trying to do everything that I can right now just to keep it. But I will pivot just like you. I'll always find a way to bring people together. That's all that there is to it.
It's been 4 years now.
Yeah.
Did people tell you were crazy when you said you're going to open a meditation studio at the time?
Yeah, lots.
And you said, watch me.
I said, have you watched any of the business trends? And not that we did it for that, but John and I are also business minded. We would not have done something that we sunk a ton of our own money into it if we didn't believe that there was at least like 2 or 3 legs to stand on. And the funny thing was, on our opening night, one of our good friends, he's an EOer in Phoenix, and he was sitting at the event with Gary Vaynerchuk, and Gary V was up on the stage. There's like 75 people only in this little mastermind event. And somebody stood up asking Gary V, he said, we were here a couple of years ago and you told us that was the time to invest in Instagram, and then it was Snapchat and on, and what is it now? This was 4 years ago. And he said, I know nothing about it, but it's meditation. And everybody was like,
Wow.
what? Like meditation, what? Like studios or apps or apparel? And he goes, it's all of it. He said, I just watch trends. And he said, and this is exactly where we're at right now. So John and I joke that we're on like the leading, bleeding edge of all of this in a way.
Well, without a doubt. I mean, how's that for a vote of confidence in terms
Oh,
of what you were doing at that moment in time? It's like you just hit
yeah.
the jackpot, right?
And you just have to be ahead of it, and you have to be willing to also kind of pivot. And both John and I are not the type of people that sit down and make a 10-year plan and have to stick to it. It's like, this is where we are now. This is how we want to create an impact. We have to stay as open and as flexible as possible. And I believe that's success in any area in life, is that you have to be willing to change and you have to be willing to shift. And if not, then I think that's where all the suffering comes in.
Well, you mentioned that it's been quite a roller coaster ride since you opened Lifestyle Meditation. I mean, my God, what business isn't? I don't think you'd be normal if you didn't have it, but what doesn't generally fit in the normal, or maybe it does, is a really massive health challenge that came your way. Will you share?
I will share. And that was the other thing too, that for a few years, because all of this started to come up for me just as we were leaving Bali and coming back home to start construction on the studio. So I was gritting through this crazy chronic back pain, and I didn't know what it was. And I went to doctors, and I did kind of I did my due diligence on the conventional side, and I did all my due diligence on the non-conventional side. And I have so many healer friends that are like, no, we just need to do Reiki on your spine. And then I have all of my physician friends that are like, you just need painkillers and your muscles are tight and you need to go for physio. But it's okay. I'm all about, collecting resources. So I went through that, for a few years for sure. And then this past September, I was on a plane down to San Francisco, and I work out of 2 studios actually in California as well, running teacher training. So get to impact more people, which is fabulous. But I was on the plane to San Francisco, and there was a moment where I was really uncomfortable in my spine. So shifting around, and I was moving a little bit, and then I felt this pop in my leg. And when I felt the pop in my leg, I had the tray table down, and I actually thought that I'd spilled cold water because the pop had this this big rush. And I threw everything up, only to look down to see that I was totally dry. Nothing had happened. And the next thought in my head was like, this isn't good. This can't be good. And I thought, well, maybe like a disc had herniated. Like, I'm back to my anatomy and physiology and being a personal trainer. I'm like, okay, anatomically, what has shifted from me sitting in this position? And I'm trying to put it all together in my head. And I got up and I walked around in the plane, and it was that really awkward pins and needles feeling, and it wouldn't go away. And landed in San Francisco. I taught for 3 solid days, 4 days actually, did an extra event there too. By the end of those 4 days, it was in both of my legs and up to my hip bones. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I thought, if I just go back and if I go to the chiropractor, I have an amazing chiropractor, and he's a physio, and I went back and he tried to do a few little things on me. And after about a week, and bless his heart, because he looked at me and he says, Mandy, I think that there's something more that's wrong with you.
Oh man.
And
Exactly what you don't want to hear.
Symptoms. Yeah. And he said, have you looked into like MS or anything like that? And I'm like, yeah, at about 3 a.m. last night.
Oh,
like
right.
Everybody else who's Googling symptoms in the middle of the night. And,
I do too.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I just kind of played a bit of a slow card on that. And I mentioned it to my husband, and he's kind of henny penny with everything. So I really go to the other side, which isn't great either. I mean, one of the greatest lessons that I've learned about myself in this is to probably pay attention and to check things out a little bit more quickly.
Right.
But I allowed that to happen for about a month, and it was getting so bad that almost like from the center of my chest down to my toes, I had very, very limited feeling. I couldn't feel that my pants were on. I couldn't feel when I had to go to the bathroom. So I was wearing like pads because I couldn't feel the sensation. So I was just doing like you do with a puppy, and just going to empty my bladder, setting a timer like every half an hour just to make sure that things were okay. And finally we called our neighbor, who's a neurologist, And she said, you need to go to the hospital now. Like, this isn't good. It doesn't sound good. This could be. And she's a neurologist that specializes in MS as well. And she said, this sounds like, something that you need to check out. So I ended up going into the emergency room the next morning, and they had done a CAT scan on my head and a whole bunch of different tests. And from that, they said, you need to go to the urgent care neurology department like tomorrow. And we need to get you in for an MRI and that. So from there, and that's kind of an interesting thing about our system, is that I also have been super healthy, everybody in my family. So I didn't appreciate really where things are at right now. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm super grateful that I didn't have to pay for my surgery or anything. But what I began to learn very, very quickly is that there's people in Alberta, for sure, if not in Canada, that are dying waiting for MRIs, that are waiting for PET scans because they can't afford it. Yeah. And I said, I'll pay for it, because the neurologist said, you can't wait. Like, if we fast track you, and it's only because we can pull strings, we can get you in a month. But he had said to me, we can't wait more than 5 days, because you'll be paralyzed. They knew what it was. All of the myelin on my neurons in my spine was being destroyed. They didn't know why it was. I started to read about it. I thought maybe it was an infection that I'd contracted in Bali, because infection can definitely do that. I thought maybe MS. But to my surprise, when I went in about 5 days later and I had the MRI done, they had the team of the techs and the radiologists come in right after and said, you need to go to the hospital immediately. And they didn't tell me why. And luckily my mom was there. We were supposed to go for lunch after. And so she drove me, which was good, because I was kind of like, what's going on? And
rattled.
I was rattled by it. But I again, in my head, I thought, you have a really severe infection. We're going to have to attach you to IVs for a few days to get this out. That's what was happening in my head. We called my husband to come and meet. And ironically, he was at U of A anyway, giving a talk to the engineering students. So he just,
it was convenient.
Totally. He's like, oh, I can't talk right now. And anyway, and then he hops in, and I did the triage thing, and we waited in the emergency room for 3 hours. There were so many people that day. Everybody slipped and fallen on the ice. And finally, John goes up front after 3 hours, and he's like, my wife was sent here 3 hours ago, and we don't know why we're here. And they said, oh, just a second, let us go check. And then I could see that there was the neurologist, that there was a neurology student, and that there was probably 3 or 4 other doctors that were standing on the other edge of the waiting room. And they said, can you come back here for a sec? And my mom and my husband came up with me, and it was this tiny little, it wasn't even a real room. It was right behind the triage desk. And I said, oh, they can probably wait out in the room. And they're like, no, you can bring them in. And that's when my heart dropped all the way down. And I remember the neurologist looking at me and saying, you know why you're here, right? And I said, no, I don't. And she's like, well, you have a tumor.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. And she said, actually, I'm looking at your MRI right now, and the woman that I just watched walk across the room, she shouldn't be walking.
Oh God.
And so it was right in my thoracic spine, and it was pinching my entire spinal cord off. And in fact, when I've shown people the pictures, it actually looks like a bike tire that has a huge rock in it that's pushing it. And they said, if you would have waited a few more days, you would have to be going out if you're in a wheelchair, not walking. So they rushed me up and start to give me all the steroids. And I have to say something that I didn't tell you before, is that I was in a joint room with another woman who has, I'm trying to remember, Parkinson's or something. Anyway, she'd had this brain surgery done and this implant put in a month before, and then she was having complications, so she was back. And so I ended up sharing a room with her. And that first night, and I was scared shitless. Like I wasn't, but I was kind of scared. And I don't know.
Well, how can you not be?
And my mom came and took the kids, and John came to sleep with me, and we pulled the curtain, and I could hear Dennis, the man next door, climbing into bed with his wife, and John climbing into bed with me. And I just,
oh my God.
And I'm like, these men that are taking care of women right now, like, bless their hearts. And they are the most amazing, amazing people. And I just think, like, if this is also the opportunity, I can't go, what's the reason that this happened to me? Because I've had people ask me that. What do you think the reason is? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't ever ask to have a tumor in the middle of my spine, you know, but if the opportunity was to get closer to my husband and to my kids, and honestly, Carrie, my tears came from me thinking about not being able to walk my kids down the aisle. Like, that is where I started to cry about it. And when they came in to prep me the next day, and the whole team of doctors were in there just saying, like, you know, you need to know that paralysis is a very real possibility of this surgery. Like, we have to go through all of the risks and complications with you. And it was wild, because in that moment, I didn't feel scared. It's like, I knew that things would be fine. And when they were wheeling me in, John took my hand to the door where then they were letting me in. And I'm going to cry telling you this, but I lost one of my best friends this summer to a sudden heart attack. And he, as John dropped my hand, he grabbed mine. And he was there with me through the whole entire thing. And he's like, man, you know, you're going to be fine. And I'm here. And this is like, and it was like me just going, it sounds crazy, but spending time with him through that whole practice. And when I came out, the first thing that I did was like touch my legs and wiggle my toes. And I just remember having tears like streaming down my eyes, like these
like
legs
me right
that
now.
I hated before, right? And looked at them in the mirror going, they're not strong enough, or they're not toned enough, or that. And I'm like, they're my fucking legs. Yeah. And then you can appreciate it. But John got me 2 pairs of Sarah Jessica Parker shoes for Christmas.
Yes. He's such a good man.
He's just like, you can dance and you can stride. And I'm like, with so much more love and gratitude. And it's changed my life. Like, there's nothing, I thought that I was full of love and gratitude before that. And then when I look at this type of a situation, and how can you not see that this is an opportunity to love more deeply, right? And to be more grateful. I get that there's fear. I had that too going in, and it was important to share it, because at one point I shared it and John's like, don't talk that way. And I said, but you know, I could be paralyzed. He's like, don't talk like that. And I said, I need to, because if I don't share my fears out loud with you, then I keep them with me, and that makes them worse. But as soon as I can let it out, then I can create space for all of what's underneath that to move through.
And that leads into my final question for you, and you kind of open the door for it, is, first of all, like, thank you for sharing that with us to that depth. But that is, I've always seen you, Mandy, as the most beautiful reflection of vulnerability. And you're one of those people that's always embraced it, way before Brene Brown preaching about it, way before the time she was telling us that vulnerability equals courage. You have always shared your story, and every element of it was such deep vulnerability. Why? Why do you do that? And where does that strength come from? Because the flip side of it, as we're all taught, is that you're going to be judged. You're going to be judged when you allow yourself to be that vulnerable. Perspective, if you will, please.
Oh, weird. People ask me that all the time, and I'm like, I can't not. I can't. And I've really thought about this a lot, is why do I do that? It's because that's how I feel connected to people. And as I feel connected to people, they feel connected to me, right? So me sharing that and watching you get vulnerable, I feel way closer to you than I've ever felt to you before, ever. And I'm like, I just want her to be my new best friend now. Because now we have this connection. Right. And I think that I was craving that for so long in my life, was real connection, not for this Mandy that everybody's like, oh, she's this amazing athlete, and oh, she can do this, and oh, it's that. And it's like, yeah, but there's way more to me than that. And so in me wanting that, I'm like, I'm going to put myself first. And it is a risk, Carrie. You're totally right. It's a risk that people say, I can't meet you there. But the experience that I've had way more times than that is people saying, when you do that, I can do that for myself. And people say, I've only met you for an hour and I feel closer to you than people that I've known for a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I am doing it for them, but I'm kind of also doing it for myself too. Those are just the connections that I want to have in my life. And I believe that everybody, back to my bio, it's not just a bio. I believe that everybody wants the truth of who they are to really be seen. I do.
I love that you pointed that out, because at the heart of my teaching is the power of story, because that's the only way we can connect with one another, is when we share our stories with each other. And that is at the heart of connections, as you have demonstrated so beautifully during this conversation. Leave us with hope, Mandy, as we navigate this crazy time in our life dealing with COVID. And for many people, the world, they're feeling like the world is spinning out of control right now. Some final thoughts as we go day to day with our families and our children in so much uncertainty. Yeah,
I think we'll see what we want to see. This is what I'll leave you with. And it was a thing that I had heard from Tony Robbins, actually, who I love.
Me too.
And he said, he used the example of him and a friend going to a party, and they're going to a party that they've never met these people before. But he goes off into the kitchen and he gets cornered and has this amazing conversation all night long with these 4 or 5 people in the kitchen. And his friend gets stuck in the living room and nobody's really talking to him, but he's watching. There's a couple who's fighting. And then there's another couple who are kind of getting chippy at each other. And then at the end of the night, they both get into the car, and Tony says to his friend, like, so how was the party? And he's like, wow, isn't that amazing? Like, everybody was fighting with each other. It was this awful energy. And Tony goes, really? Is that what you got? Like, I thought that party was amazing. And so I think the hope is that no matter if it's COVID time or it was pre-COVID time or post-COVID time, is that we'll always see what we want to see. And also, if you don't like what you're seeing, just change your perspective, pivot 10 degrees to the right, and you're going to see something that's probably different. So we have the power to choose what it is that we want to focus on, right? It sounds a little bit hokey. I think sometimes we can take the spiritual bypass and say, I only want to focus on the positive stuff and not look at any of the yucky negative stuff. And if that makes you feel better in the moment, go for it. But it's okay to see all of it. But then at the end of the day to say, yeah, no, it's okay. I'm still going to choose to look over here at the really good stuff. So I think if we have this expectation, as I'm sharing that we're birthing this new world, is it's not stepping back into the Garden of Eden, that everything is going to be perfect. It's not. But there's going to be more perfection, I believe. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of us actually creating it and looking for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
You are a beautiful soul inside and out. And I really am happy that we waited until this point, that you didn't return my phone calls, because you were not getting them because I had the wrong number. But the universe provides and brought us together at exactly the time that we're supposed to connect. Thank you so much for your perspective, your vulnerability, and for sharing all your stories, for the empowerment and the inspiration. You truly are a gift. Thank you for stepping into the inner circle today, Mandy.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Sounds perfect.